All right, so we're going to be looking at the economic challenges and industry that we see in Japan in terms of their agriculture and stuff. We know that Japan left off World War One unhappy because even though they were on the winning side, they were gaining no respect. So now it's time to look at to see what is happening internally in Japan and how this ends up having a ripple effect or being a motivation for Japan to expand. World War One offered them a lot of opportunity to grow, and basically, the reason why is because they're exporting a lot of stuff. People are consuming Japanese goods, and basically, not just Asian countries, but also European countries and the United States. Despite this, though, only 50% of the workers in Japan were still involved. 50% of the workers in Japan were involved in primary industries such as farming, fishing, and mining. In 1927, people who worked in urban areas earned a little bit more than those who were working in farming communities. So farming families were only earning 70% of the income that um, office workers or people in urban areas were earning. So they were earning less money than those living in big cities. Um, Another statistic that we need to look at to see what's happening in Japan, 84% of Japan's population was composed of either farmers or people working in the city and offices, right? But despite the fact that they make 80% of the population, 50% of they were only gaining 50% of Japan's wealth. So 84% of the population had to basically fight for 50% of Japan's wealth. While where is the other 50% going? To a very small population. The very, very rich are basically taking 50% of Japan's wealth. And, they're not really struggling because that's a lot of money. Also, another thing that you see is that you see monopolies forming in Japan. One of the monopolies that's forming in Japan is the banking industry, the finance sector, and you see small banks disappearing and big banks taking control of basically what's being left out. Um, so that's basically what we see. The Great Depression. We only think of the Great Depression as something that affected basically Europe and the United States, even though we know that every country was impacted by this. Japan is not an exception to that either. 1929 Wall Street crashes, Japanese exports fall by 6%. That doesn't seem a lot, but for Japan, it is a lot. Especially for any country, losing 6% of your exports, you're losing millions of dollars. And aside from that, you have 1 million people unemployed in Japan. That's 1 million of your individuals not working. What are they doing? They're not contributing, right? Agricultural incomes also slumped. So remember, they already weren't earning a lot of money, right? And now with the Great Depression, they're earning even less money. Japan's response to this was, okay, well, in order for the government to be able to fix this, we need to stop spending money on stuff. And that's basically what they did. The problem with that is that Japan's population is still growing and they need living space in order, and also just plots of land in order to kind of grow more food to feed their population. How do they do this? Japan's army's like, all right, we got you. And they go out and they start like grabbing all of these like territories and basically saying like, here we are, here it is, come on over. And so when the population of Japan, about 30K, 300K, see all of this land that the military has control over outside of Japan, and they start moving there and they start basically their communities and farming and all of that stuff. This makes a lot of people very bitter because this land is not just free land that nobody's living in it. People were living on this land. Another issue that you see with this, though, there's an issue with this. It costs money for the army to do this. It's not like the army, is teleporting from one place to another. No, they need gasoline. They need machines in order to go over. They need weapons, they need clothing, they need to feed the soldiers and everything. So the more imperialistic Japan becomes, the more they become reliant on raw materials in order to be able to do this. So why is that a problem? Because remember, in the last slide, Japan was like, we're not going to spend any more money. But now it's like, ooh, we need to spend money because the army needs it. And if we want to expand, we need we need to financially support the army. And that's how they end up reversing that policy of no spending to all of a sudden pouring in all of this money into the military. Social and cultural changes in Japan under the 1920s, under Showa. So basically, during the 1920s, Japan was influenced by Western culture and customs. By this, they mean European governments, European ways of life, United States way of life. This ends up creating a rivalry between the urban area of Japan and the rural area of Japan. Basically, those who were living in cities saw those who were living in the farmlands, as you can see in the bottom picture. They saw them as kind of like ignorant people who were stuck in their ways and like, see, you're not moving forward in life. You don't want to like advance in life and adapt to the new world. This is why you're poor, that you're dumb, all of this stuff, right? While those living in the farming communities saw the city life and they're like, that's nothing but corruption over there. You know, all of that fast life, corruption, like you're abandoning your traditions, like that's not good. That's basically they view each other, both of them, both communities view each other in a very negative way. This is going to be taken advantage of. The conservative parties, the politicians, basically see the rural area in Japan and basically are like, well, maybe we could get them to join our side and play on the fact that they are stuck in their traditions and are very like nationalistic in Japan and like the terms of like Japan's number one, like we stick to tradition. And so basically these politicians were able to gain the support of these rural farmers. And that's a big population to have behind you, right? Um, Now we see the left-leaning side of Japan. So we've been looking at the right wing, the ultra-nationalistic right-wing parties in Japan. What about the left? Because the left still exists, right? Well, now that we see Japan shifting towards the right, the left is going to get shut down. Any leftist movements, anybody who mentions communism, socialism, or anything is shut down automatically. And, you know, you're suppressed. Your voice is suppressed, and you're not really allowed to voice your opinion in that way. You're seen as a danger to society. Um, Next part, even before Japan began to actively pursue leftists, there had been already a suppression, a history of like suppressing leftists in Japan. And, you know, some examples: 1906, the Socialist Party is established, is banned, and you just go on through the list. The Communist Party also, the leaders are arrested, all of that stuff. In 1928, Japan's general election did not see an increase in left-leaning parties because of the fact that they were suppressing and shutting down all of these leftist parties. So any communist, socialist, or anybody just leaned a little bit to the left, shut down, right? Um, why does this happen? Why did this also happen? Another reason is because big businesses do not like leftist parties. Why? Because they like to unionize for the most part. Not all the time, but for the most part, unions do lean to the left. And you don't want unions if you're a big business because they basically demand for better working conditions, more pay for their workers. And big businesses did not want that. So what they start doing is they start backing the right-wing parties in Japan and saying, we're going to pay you all of this money and we're going to put out all this propaganda for you as long as you support big business. And the politicians are like, all right, cool. And so basically they bombard the population of Japan with all of this propaganda to get people to vote for the right. And that's what happened. People voted for the right, and now you don't really see any leftists. And yeah, that's it for this presentation.